Hello, my name is Al Getz, and welcome to the Charting the Territories Event Center for Western States Sports, affectionately known as the Amarillo Territory in wrestling circles, for a one-week period of time in 1971. We are going to look at the lineups for 12 known house shows in the territory during a one-week period of time in 1971, and then we're going to use a little bit of data magic to try and estimate how many shows we're missing. So the week we're looking at is Thanksgiving week in 1971 in West Texas and the surrounding areas. And we, as I mentioned earlier, we have records for 12 house shows. On Monday, they ran in Abilene and El Paso. On Tuesday, November 23rd, we have records for one show in Odessa, Texas. On Wednesday, the 24th, Hobbs, New Mexico and Lubbock, Texas. On Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, November 25th, Amarillo, Texas, and San Angelo, Texas. On Friday, November 26th, Big Spring, Texas. Saturday, the 27th, Colorado Springs, Colorado, and Hereford, Texas, at a venue whose name is the Bull Barn, which I absolutely love. And then on Sunday, they ran two cards in New Mexico, one in Albuquerque and one in Clovis. Now, interesting about why they ran two shows in New Mexico on Sundays, for many, many years, Texas would not allow them to hold wrestling events on Sundays. Like many places in the South, due to what we call the blue laws, they weren't allowed to have shows on Sundays. So Amarillo solved this problem by heading west to New Mexico, where local promoter Mike London ran cards in Albuquerque and Clovis, so all of the crew could work not just on Sundays, but literally every single day of the week. So now let's take a look at the lineups for all these house shows. On Monday in Abilene, the main event was Ricky Romero versus Bob Roop. Also on the card, Johnny Valentine, brought in for just a one-off appearance from East Texas, taking on Lightning R. Jones, who was Sonny King. Mr. Okuma, also known as Matoshi Okuma, and Masio Koma took on the Lawman, Dan Slatton, and Jerry Kozak, plus Alex Perez faced Chief Little Eagle. Also that same night in El Paso, in a show promoted by Gory Guerrero, Ciclon Negro took on Mr. Wrestling, and this version of Mr. Wrestling was Gordon Nelson under the mask, plus a tag match with Lord Alfred Hayes and Eric Rommel, who's better known as Eric Freilich, against the Infernos, managed by J.C. Dykes. In a special Korea versus USA matchup, Pak Song took on Buck Robley, Kay Noble faced Mary Laverne, and in a special rules match, J.C. Dykes took on Salvador Dominguez. Now, a special rules match, probably something along the lines of Dominguez had to pin Dykes twice in a certain amount of time, or it was just a reduced time limit for the match altogether, something to that effect, because Dykes, of course, was the manager of the Infernos. And also at this time, Buck Robley is sort of transitioning from a manager to a full-time wrestler. He had been wrestling regularly, then he suffered a car accident, and then he became a manager for the heel team of Bobby Hart and Lorenzo Parente, but ended up kind of sort of turning babyface, and then Robley feuded with J.C. Dykes. So Robley's sort of in this transitional period where he's transitioning back to being a full-time wrestler. The next night in Odessa, Robley faced J.C. Dykes in the final match on the card, but you'll notice this ad lists the second match from the top as the main event, which is Ricky Romero versus Bob Roop. Also, Mr. Wrestling versus Pak Song, Eric Rommel versus Lord Alfred Hayes, Okuma and Koma, who at this point here are being managed by Buck Robley, against the Infernos, managed by J.C. Dykes, plus Lightning R. Jones versus Alex Perez. Of course, this Alex Perez was not Al Perez from the 80s, known as affectionately as Seth Rollins' dad because they look so much alike, but this was a different wrestler who worked in Amarillo and the surrounding areas for many years in the 60s and 70s. On Wednesday, November 24th, in Hobbs, New Mexico, a six-man tag as the main event as the Lawman teamed with Lightning R. Jones and Buck Robley to face the Infernos and J.C. Dykes. And this was an elimination match. So when one man is pinned, he is out, and so on and so forth until only one team remains. Also, Kay Noble versus Marie Laverne, and a California-style match between Buck Robley and one of the Infernos. And here he's billed as Clubfoot Inferno. You'll recall the Infernos, one of them always used a loaded up boot, while the other one threw fire. Interestingly enough, the two wrestlers that worked as the Infernos, which at this time were Curtis and Rocky Smith, they often switched up which wrestler portrayed Clubfoot Inferno because the boot was actually very uncomfortable to wear. So forcing the same person to wear it night after night was not good. So they rotated in and out of which one was the Clubfoot Inferno and which one was the other. But a California style match is something you don't see too often, especially outside of this territory. It's just a different twist on doing a preliminary match between wrestlers that are going to be in the main event later on. So here we see Buck Robley against one of the Infernos in a match with 5 rounds of 2 minutes each. That same night in Lubbock, Texas, Terry Funk took on Ciclon Negro in a Russian chain match. Also on the card, Bob Roop versus Mr. Wrestling, Ricky Romero and Lord Alfred Hayes against Okuma and Coma, Eric Rommel versus Pak Song, and Alex Perez versus Salvador Dominguez. On Thanksgiving in Amarillo, Texas, the main event, a bounty hunter match as Dory Funk Sr. faces Bob Roop. Also for the tag team titles, Mr. Okuma and Masio Coma against Mr. Wrestling and Eric Rommel. A special attraction, Lord Alfred Hayes versus Terry Funk, Sal Dominguez versus Alex Perez, and in the opener, Chief Little Eagle faced Big Nick Roberts. As you can see, there was also a special drawing for 10 free turkeys. Hopefully that was 10 different fans chosen to each receive a turkey, as opposed to one lucky fan getting 10 turkeys. Also on Thanksgiving night in San Angelo, Texas, the main event was a chain match between J.C. Dykes and Buck Robley. Also, the Infernos took on Ricky Romero and Lightning R. Jones. Kay Noble faced Marie Laverne, this time billed for the Texas Ladies Championship. And in the opener, the lawman Don Slatton took on Pak Song. On Friday, November 26th, in Big Spring, Texas, once again in a Russian chain match, J.C. Dykes against Buck Robley. In the semi, the Infernos took on the Lawman and Mr. Wrestling, and in the opener, Sal Dominguez faced Jerry Kozak. On Saturday, the 27th, in Colorado Springs, Colorado, a 6-man tag team match is the main event, and this apparently was the first 6-man tag ever to be held in Colorado Springs. The Infernos teaming up with their manager, J.C. Dykes, to take on Ricky Romero, Dory Funk Sr., and Yellow Belly Buck Robley. Also on the card, Ciclon Negro versus Eric Rommel, and Bob Roop taking on Lightning R. Jones. That same night at the Bull Barn, in a tag team match with an additional stipulation that karate will be allowed, Lord Alfred Hayes and Salvador Dominguez took on Mr. Okuma and Masio Coma. You can see here on the ad, they actually flipped their first name, but it's supposed to be Mr. Okuma and Masio Coma. Also on the card, Mr. Wrestling Gordon Nelson against Pak Song, and Alex Perez taking on Nick Roberts. And on Sunday in Albuquerque, Ricky Romero faced Mr. Okuma plus Ciclon Negro versus Buck Robley in a match where they could not stop for blood. Tag team action saw the Infernos take on Lord Alfred Hayes and Eric Rommel, and Sal Dominguez faced Masio Coma in the opener. We also have an ad for another card on Sunday in Clovis, New Mexico. But as you can see, the ad that we found on newspapers.com isn't much help. Now, if you're familiar with the wrestlers in the territory at the time, and in particular, knowing who's booked on the other card in Albuquerque, you actually can take a close-up of the top listed match, the main event, and I'm about 99.9% sure that that is Mr. Wrestling versus Bob Roop, which is a logical main event given each wrestler's position on the cards and the fact that neither of them were booked in Albuquerque. So that's almost certainly what the main event was. It looks like there are 2 other matches, one of which is probably a tag. I can't really make out who the wrestlers are. If you can probably look and come up with some guesses, but at this point, knowing the main event is probably the closest we're going to get to knowing this card. So now that we have all those lineups, let's look at a spreadsheet I put together showing all the wrestlers in the territory and where they were booked each night of the week. So you can see the baby faces are listed on the left-hand side, the heels on the right. The full-time wrestlers are listed at the top, and they're listed in descending order by their spot rating. Below them, we have managers and part-timers. You can see on the left, you have Buck Robley and Chief Little Eagle listed separately because Robley was mostly a manager and Little Eagle was a part-timer. Same goes for the heels with JC Dykes, Johnny Valentine, and Nick Roberts, and the ladies are listed at the very bottom. For each wrestler, we list the towns they're booked in each night of the week on this spreadsheet. Anything that's shaded in yellow is indicating that the wrestler was outside of the territory. Here we see both Terry Funk and Dory Sr. worked for Jim Crockett Promotions on Monday and Tuesday, came back and Terry worked in Lubbock and Amarillo, while Dory Sr. only worked Amarillo. But then Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, Terry Funk is almost certainly flying to Japan, where he's about to start a tour there. On the right-hand side, you'll see Ciclon Negro was booked in Detroit on November 26th, and Johnny Valentine, who I mentioned earlier, was just in for a one-shot, spent most of his week wrestling in East Texas. Now, there are a couple of places where I shaded things in an orange reddish tint. Those are the Clovis card, where we are pretty sure, but not 100% positive, that Bob Roop and Mr. Wrestling were in the main event. Also, a card in Lubbock that advertised Ciclon Negro, though he didn't actually appear on the card. And the reason why I sort of have that as a different shading is given the fact that he's not advertised on either of the cards on Tuesday or Thursday, any of the three cards we have records for, and that he's in Detroit on the 26th, perhaps he was given a couple of days off to travel up to Detroit. So even though he's advertised for that Lubbock card, he did not appear. So I just sort of had it shaded differently. And anytime one of these wrestlers is not booked on any of the cards we have records for, they are left blank and there's that blue shading. So going back day by day, on Monday, we had cards in Abilene and El Paso. And as you can see, the entire crew was booked on one of those two cards or was booked outside the territory. On Tuesday, the 23rd, we only had records for Odessa. But if you look, there's really not a whole lot of wrestlers not booked. Ciclon Negro is really the only heel not booked, while on the babyface side, we have Don Slatton, the lawman, plus Jerry Kozak and Sal Dominguez. So using only that information, it's possible they didn't run a second show. However, I think they did, and the clue that sort of gives it away for me is the fact that the two female wrestlers, Kay Noble and Marie Laverne, are not booked in Odessa. And typically when the women or the little persons or Andre or the world champion, the special attractions come into a territory, they wrestle every single night. So the fact that Noble and Laverne aren't wrestling here, and I can't find records for them working anywhere else that same night, sort of leads me to believe that there was an additional small show. So it would have had a ladies match. It could have had Ciclon versus Don Slatton, and perhaps an opener with Jerry Kozak versus Sal Dominguez, or maybe even a mixed tag involving the two of them and the women. On Wednesday, the 24th, we have records for cards in Lubbock and Hobbs. And again, all the heels are booked, but Dory Funk Sr. and Jerry Kozak are not booked. Now, in this case, that certainly is not enough to deduce that there's an additional card. So I'd say just those two cards was it. And on Thursday, same thing as on Wednesday, Amarillo and San Angelo, only a couple of wrestlers unbooked, and that is Ciclon Negro, who, as I mentioned earlier, was likely had an off day to travel to Detroit, and Jerry Kozak. And Jerry Kozak in particular would not wrestle in Amarillo because he was actually the local promoter for Amarillo, and Texas had a rule where the local promoters could not wrestle on their own cards. Of course, Don Slatton as the lawman is the exception to that rule, but that's another story for another time. On Friday, we only have records for one card in Big Spring, and you can look at the roster and see there definitely were enough wrestlers not booked in Big Spring for there to have been another card. On the babyface side, Ricky Romero, Dory Sr., Lord Alfred Hayes, Eric Rommel, and Lightning R. Jones are available. And on the heel side, you have Roop, Okuma, Koma, Pak Song, and Alex Perez. So you could have had Roop versus Romero, Okuma and Koma against, let's say, Hayes and Rommel, and perhaps Lightning R. Jones against Pak Song or Alex Perez, and maybe Dory Sr. taking on the other heel of Song or Perez that wasn't booked against Jones, or it's possible that Dory Sr. and one of the heels had the day off. On Saturday, November 27th, 2 cards, Colorado Springs and Hereford, Texas at the Bull Barn. And I just really like saying Bull Barn, sorry. And again, we have 2 baby faces that were not booked, but that's not enough to warrant an additional card. And this was the Lawman Don Slatton and Jerry Kozak. Same thing goes on Sunday, 2 cards in Albuquerque and Clovis. There wouldn't have been an additional card. And remember, we couldn't make out who was booked on that card in Clovis, but looking at who's available, we have a pretty good idea of who was on that show. Pak Song and Al Perez, and at least two of the 4 available baby faces, consisting of Dory Sr., the Lawman, Lightning R. Jones, and Jerry Kozak. It could have been a tag team match with a prelim match involving 2 of the wrestlers in the tag match, or there could have been a third match, one of them being babyface versus babyface. So there you have it. We have records for 12 house shows in a 1-week period of time for this territory, and are almost certain that there were 2 additional. So they ran 2 cards each night of the week on this particular week, which was usually the way it worked in this territory, although there are times when Amarillo on Thursdays was an all-hands-on-deck card, and they didn't run a second show that night. The same could be said periodically for some of the Tuesday or Wednesday cards in Odessa or Lubbock, but as a general rule of thumb, they're running 2 cards a night most nights of the week. To get more information on Western State sports in 1971, be sure to visit chartingtheterritories.com for a year in the life. And don't forget, the second Thursday of each and every month, John Boucher and I host the Charting the Territories podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, pretty much wherever you get your favorite wrestling podcasts. Thanks for watching the Event Center. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube so you can see all the video content we put out. And again, be sure to visit chartingtheterritories.com. For Charting the Territories, this is Al Getz signing off.